You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. An adaptive process begins with the recognition that change is not an anomaly, but a constant force shaping how work unfolds. Instead of treating a plan as a static contract to be obeyed, adaptive teams regard it as a living document that evolves responsibly with evidence. Plans, backlogs, and scope are expected to shift, not as a sign of disorder, but as a healthy response to new information. This approach requires discipline, because it is not about reacting to every whim, but about staying anchored to outcomes while allowing the path toward them to flex. By orienting around evidence and results, teams avoid the rigidity of prediction that rarely matches reality. The adaptive process ensures that effort is aligned to value, keeping resources focused where they matter most. In a shifting environment, it turns uncertainty from a liability into a mechanism for smarter, more relevant decisions. Adaptive foundations replace the illusion of control through rigid prediction with the reality of rolling decisions. Traditional project management often assumes that requirements can be fully known up front, but in dynamic contexts, discovery is ongoing. Risks emerge, constraints evolve, and opportunities surface unexpectedly. An adaptive approach accepts these facts and creates mechanisms to reshape plans as they unfold. Instead of one long, brittle forecast, work is managed in waves, each based on the best information available at the time. This does not mean abandoning planning altogether, but rather acknowledging its temporary nature and building in regular opportunities to revise. The key shift is moving from a mindset of set in stone to one of guided by evidence. By embracing rolling decisions, teams create flexibility without chaos, balancing the need for direction with the humility that not all variables can be predicted at the outset. Drivers of change come from many directions, and each requires a different response. User insights may show that assumptions about behavior were incomplete, while technical findings may reveal integration challenges or performance bottlenecks. Market shifts can alter competitive priorities, regulatory changes can impose new compliance requirements, and risk signals may demand quick mitigation. Adaptive teams treat these drivers not as distractions, but as inputs that guide evolution. Each driver carries its own urgency and adaptation lever. For example, a compliance shift might require immediate reordering of work, while a market change could prompt exploratory experiments. Recognizing the source and nature of change helps teams select the appropriate response rather than treating all disruptions the same. This categorization creates clarity and avoids both overreaction and neglect. By learning to parse the different drivers, teams ensure that adjustments are not arbitrary but aligned to the type and magnitude of the trigger. Rolling wave planning provides the structure that keeps adaptive processes coherent. Instead of locking in every detail months ahead, near-term work is planned in fine detail while longer-term horizons are outlined with broad intent. This creates a balance between precision and flexibility. Stakeholders gain confidence that immediate commitments are realistic, while also understanding that farther-out plans will evolve. For example, the next sprint or iteration may include detailed stories with acceptance criteria, while the roadmap for the next quarter shows themes and goals without dictating exact features. This method prevents the false precision of predicting what cannot yet be known while still preserving direction. Rolling wave planning helps teams maintain trust because it communicates both the plan and the humility that parts of the plan are provisional. This balance keeps the team agile while ensuring that sponsors and partners do not feel abandoned to uncertainty. Thin slice delivery is a practice that turns adaptive planning into tangible value. By delivering in small, testable increments, teams demonstrate progress and validate assumptions early. Rather than waiting for a large release, stakeholders can see and interact with working slices of functionality, which provides faster feedback. These thin slices expose integration issues sooner and reduce the risk of discovering problems late in the cycle. For example, deploying a simple login feature before building advanced workflows allows usability and performance insights to surface early, shaping subsequent development. This approach also reassures sponsors that investment is yielding visible results, maintaining confidence even as requirements evolve. Thin slice delivery avoids the trap of speculation by grounding design choices in actual usage. Each slice becomes both a proof point and a learning opportunity, helping the team refine its direction while steadily delivering value along the way. Anchoring outcomes is essential to prevent adaptive processes from drifting into chaos. While features and sequencing may flex, the goals and success measures should remain steady. Anchoring outcomes means defining the why behind the work and making sure it continues to guide decisions, even as the what changes. For example, a team tasked with reducing customer onboarding time may adjust which features they build first, but the measure of success faster onboarding remains consistent. This clarity prevents teams from confusing activity with impact. It also makes adaptation less threatening, because stakeholders see that the original intent is preserved even as tactics evolve. Anchoring outcomes acts like a compass. No matter how often the path shifts, the destination remains visible. This prevents wasted energy and ensures that adaptation always serves the larger purpose, rather than devolving into reactive churn. Continuous backlog refinement is another practice that embodies adaptability. Backlogs are not static inventories, but living lists of possibilities, priorities, and hypotheses. Refinement involves regularly reviewing items, breaking large ideas into smaller, testable pieces, and updating acceptance criteria as new insights emerge. This ensures that when work is ready to be pulled, it is already well understood and aligned with current priorities. Refinement also prevents outdated or irrelevant items from clogging the system. For example, a feature request based on an old assumption may be retired after market research shows a shift in customer preferences. By keeping the backlog fresh, teams create flow and prevent waste. Continuous refinement requires discipline, but it rewards teams with responsiveness and clarity. The process demonstrates that adaptation is not just about reacting to change, but about steadily preparing for it in a structured, intentional way. Prioritization principles ensure that every adjustment maximizes value. Since not all items can be done at once, adaptive teams weigh factors such as expected benefit, risk reduction, cost of delay, and effort. This creates a rational basis for deciding what comes next. For instance, a small feature that reduces a major security risk may be prioritized ahead of a larger feature with less immediate impact. The goal is not just to maximize return on investment, but to serve the best available bet at the time. Prioritization is dynamic, revisited as conditions change, and it often requires tough trade-offs. By making the criteria explicit, teams build trust with stakeholders who can see why certain items rise or fall in priority. Clear principles replace arbitrary decision-making with transparent reasoning, reducing conflict and making adaptation feel purposeful rather than chaotic. Stakeholder co-prioritization extends this transparency by directly involving sponsors, users, and partners in the process. Instead of presenting stakeholders with a finished plan, adaptive teams invite them into trade-off discussions. This builds alignment early and reduces the likelihood of resistance later. For example, if adding a new compliance feature delays a marketing-driven release, stakeholders can see and agree to the trade-off rather than being surprised afterward. Co-prioritization makes the costs and benefits of adaptation explicit, distributing ownership of decisions across all parties. This approach strengthens relationships and ensures that priorities reflect a shared understanding of value, not just internal assumptions. By involving stakeholders directly, teams make adaptation a collaborative act rather than a unilateral change, fostering trust and reducing the political friction that often accompanies shifting plans. Change policies provide lightweight guardrails that replace heavy-handed control mechanisms. In traditional models, change requests may require lengthy approvals, which slows responsiveness and breeds frustration. Adaptive teams streamline this by establishing clear, simple rules about who can resequence work, when evidence is sufficient to justify changes, and how updates should be communicated. These policies ensure that adaptation remains disciplined without becoming bureaucratic. For example, a policy might state that product owners can resequence items within a sprint if new compliance requirements arise, provided they document the rationale and notify stakeholders. This balance of flexibility and clarity empowers teams to act quickly while maintaining transparency. By codifying these rules, organizations prevent confusion and avoid the extremes of either uncontrolled chaos or paralyzing rigidity. Lightweight change policies ensure that adaptation is both agile and accountable, protecting trust as plans evolve. Capacity realism grounds adaptive processes in evidence about what teams can actually deliver. Instead of overloading schedules with optimistic forecasts, teams use empirical throughput data and variability trends to size commitments. This ensures that expectations are based on observed capability rather than wishful thinking. For example, if a team consistently completes 5 stories per iteration, committing to 10 creates unsustainable pressure and inevitable disappointment. By planning within realistic capacity, teams leave room for emergent work while avoiding burnout. Capacity realism also reinforces credibility, as stakeholders learn to trust that commitments are both achievable and meaningful. Reserving slack for unexpected discoveries prevents disruption and gives the team resilience. Ultimately, capacity realism is a discipline of humility, recognizing limits, planning accordingly, and building adaptability not by squeezing harder, but by aligning ambition with sustainable performance. Dependency awareness is another essential element of adaptive planning. Work rarely happens in isolation. Features depend on other teams, vendors, or legacy systems. Ignoring these relationships creates optimistic reordering that may collapse in integration. Adaptive teams map dependencies explicitly, considering how each change interacts with others. For instance, delivering a new reporting feature may rely on database updates from another group, and resequencing one without the other would create bottlenecks. By factoring dependencies into adaptation choices, teams avoid the false agility of local optimization that undermines global outcomes. Tools such as dependency boards, system demos, and cross-team planning sessions help maintain this awareness. The goal is not to eliminate dependencies, which is often impossible, but to manage them consciously. In this way, adaptation strengthens the whole system, rather than producing isolated wins that lead to larger integration failures. Non-functional constraints also shape how requirements evolve. Performance, security, and operability are not optional extras but essential acceptance conditions. Adaptive teams treat these constraints as part of the definition of done, ensuring that shortcuts do not compromise system integrity. For example, a new feature may delight users but must still meet encryption standards, response time thresholds, or monitoring requirements. As requirements shift, these non-functional elements provide stability, guiding design decisions, and limiting risky compromises. This discipline ensures that adaptation improves outcomes without degrading foundational qualities. Recognizing non-functional requirements as constraints also clarifies trade-offs. Some shortcuts may save time in the short term but create unacceptable risks in the long term. By integrating these conditions into adaptive processes, teams maintain a balance between speed and sustainability, ensuring that flexibility does not undermine trust, reliability, or safety. Living documentation keeps adaptive work transparent and current. Instead of static documents that quickly go stale, living documentation evolves alongside the plan. Decisions, rationales, and updated acceptance criteria are recorded as they occur, so artifacts reflect the present reality rather than a historical snapshot. For example, a product wiki may show why a certain requirement was reprioritized, linking to data and stakeholder discussions that inform the choice. This transparency reduces confusion, aligns distributed teams, and preserves organizational memory. It also satisfies audit and compliance needs without requiring massive, retrospective effort. Living documentation embodies the same values as adaptive planning: flexibility, evidence, and transparency. By making the documentation process lightweight and continuous, organizations ensure that learning and adaptation are visible, reducing the friction that often arises when plans and artifacts drift apart. Change communication is the final piece that sustains trust during adaptation. When plans shift, stakeholders need more than a terse update. They need context about what changed, why it changed, and what the expected effects will be. Clear communication helps prevent rumors, misinterpretations, or the perception of chaos. For example, announcing that a feature was delayed because a security risk was discovered frames the change as responsible stewardship rather than incompetence. Effective communication also highlights how the adjustment supports outcomes, reinforcing that the team remains focused on delivering value. By consistently explaining the rationale behind adaptations, organizations maintain stakeholder confidence and reduce resistance. Change becomes less threatening when it is accompanied by clarity and respect. In this way, communication is not just an afterthought, but an integral practice that makes adaptive processes credible, responsible, and sustainable over time. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Replanning cadence is a critical element that prevents adaptation from becoming either frantic or stagnant. Without rhythm, teams may overreact to every signal or fail to adjust until it is too late. By coordinating sprint planning, Kanban replenishment, and interim touchpoints, adaptive teams build a predictable tempo for making changes. This cadence balances flexibility with stability, ensuring that adjustments happen often enough to stay relevant, but not so frequently that they cause thrash. For example, teams may hold bi-weekly backlog refinements for fine-tuning while reserving quarterly reviews for larger shifts in direction. The consistency of this cycle reassures stakeholders that adaptation is intentional rather than reactive. It also makes change less stressful, since everyone knows when to expect updates and how decisions will be integrated. Replanning cadence turns adaptation into a disciplined habit, embedding responsiveness into the team's operating rhythm. Ordering techniques give teams a structured way to make prioritization decisions under pressure. Common tools include relative ranking, cost of delay heuristics, and value versus effort matrices. Each method provides a consistent framework to weigh competing priorities, which reduces disputes and builds confidence in the outcome. For instance, relative ranking asks stakeholders to compare two items at a time, forcing a decision about which provides more value. Cost of delay calculations make explicit the impact of weighting, showing how delay can erode value or increase risk. Value versus effort matrices highlight low-hanging fruit, where small investments deliver large returns. By applying these techniques, teams avoid the trap of gut instinct or loudest voice decision-making. Ordering becomes defensible, transparent, and adaptable to changing conditions. The key benefit is not the tool itself, but the shared language it creates, enabling diverse stakeholders to align quickly around evidence-based trade-offs. Scenario playbooks equip teams to handle unexpected interrupts without losing momentum. Incidents, urgent regulatory deadlines, or sudden market events can derail carefully laid plans unless there is a clear process for response. A playbook specifies how to pause ongoing work, resequence priorities, and resume afterward without losing context. For example, if a critical vulnerability is discovered, the playbook might direct the team to freeze discretionary features, address the defect immediately, and conduct a brief review before resuming normal flow. By having these scenarios mapped in advance, teams avoid confusion and finger-pointing when crises hit. Playbooks also reduce recovery time because roles, responsibilities, and fallback strategies are already defined. This preparation transforms interrupts from destabilizing shocks into manageable deviations. Ultimately, scenario playbooks reinforce the idea that adaptation is not improvisation but structured responsiveness, turning what could be chaos into an orderly, evidence-based adjustment. Option backlogs provide flexibility by maintaining a pool of pre-sliced items and alternative approaches. Instead of scrambling when priorities shift, teams can pivot quickly because options have already been shaped into actionable units. For instance, if market research reveals interest in a new feature, the option backlog may already contain exploratory slices that can be pulled in immediately. Similarly, if an initiative is paused, alternative items can fill the capacity without delay. This practice reduces downtime, maintains momentum, and ensures that adaptation is opportunistic rather than disruptive. Option backlogs also mitigate the psychological stress of change, since the team has visible choices rather than starting from scratch each time. By keeping a curated set of possibilities ready, organizations increase their ability to seize emerging opportunities and respond to risks. In essence, option backlogs act as insurance, ensuring that adaptation remains swift and confident instead of hesitant or chaotic. Adaptation triggers are signals that prompt teams to reconsider their plans before small issues compound into major failures. Examples include cycle time spikes, clusters of defects, or the invalidation of a critical assumption. By monitoring these signals, teams can intervene early rather than waiting for more serious consequences. For instance, if a defect cluster emerges in a specific module, the trigger may call for an immediate review of quality practices in that area. Similarly, if cycle times lengthen unexpectedly, it may indicate bottlenecks or overcommitment. Triggers transform abstract metrics into actionable cues for adaptation. They also help avoid overreaction by defining thresholds that justify reevaluation. This creates discipline around change, ensuring that teams adapt for clear reasons rather than based on hunches. Over time, adaptation triggers make the process more proactive, allowing organizations to steer continuously rather than lurch from crisis to crisis. Assumption logs and validation plans formalize the learning that underpins adaptation. Instead of letting assumptions remain implicit, teams document them in logs with owners, timelines, and clear decision stakes. Each assumption is paired with a validation plan, which outlines how and when it will be tested. For example, a product team might log the belief that a new feature will reduce support tickets and pair it with a plan to measure ticket volume after release. If the assumption proves false, the plan specifies what action to take. This structure ensures that discovery is not left to chance, but is an intentional part of the process. By making assumptions explicit, teams reduce bias, encourage accountability, and prevent forgotten bets from quietly driving decisions. Over time, assumption logs create a transparent record of organizational learning, reinforcing that adaptation is grounded in evidence rather than wishful thinking. Lightweight governance reviews are essential for balancing agility with oversight. Traditional reviews often demand extensive documentation and rigid approvals, which slow responsiveness. Adaptive teams streamline this by focusing governance on evidence of value and risk reduction rather than paperwork. For example, a review might ask for a demo of working software or a summary of validated assumptions instead of thick reports. This keeps governance relevant, fast, and focused on outcomes. By aligning review criteria with learning and results, teams satisfy the need for accountability while preserving their ability to adapt quickly. Lightweight reviews also reduce adversarial dynamics, shifting the tone from gatekeeping to guidance. Stakeholders see progress through tangible demonstrations, which builds trust and reduces the demand for bureaucratic controls. In this way, governance supports adaptation rather than stifling it, creating a partnership between oversight and delivery. Compliance-aligned traceability ensures that adaptation remains auditable without becoming cumbersome. In regulated environments, changing requirements must be linked to tests, approvals, and releases. Adaptive teams manage this by embedding traceability into their workflows, rather than bolting it on afterward. For example, updating a backlog item can automatically link it to associated test cases and approval records. This integration satisfies auditors while allowing the backlog to remain fluid. Traceability also provides confidence that even as priorities shift, no compliance obligation is overlooked. By treating traceability as a living system rather than a static binder, teams remain both nimble and accountable. This balance is especially important in industries like healthcare or finance, where adaptability cannot come at the cost of regulatory integrity. Compliance-aligned traceability demonstrates that agility and discipline are not opposites but can reinforce one another when designed thoughtfully. Vendor alignment is often overlooked but critical for adaptive success. External partners must be able to flex with evolving priorities, which requires contracts and practices that support iteration. Instead of rigid deliverable-based agreements, adaptive organizations negotiate for iterative acceptance, demo cadence, and joint backlog participation. For example, a vendor might commit to showing working increments every 2 weeks, aligning with the internal team's rhythm. This allows external contributions to integrate smoothly into changing plans. Without such alignment, vendors can become bottlenecks, locked into outdated scopes while the organization moves on. By bringing partners into the adaptive process, organizations extend flexibility across boundaries and avoid the friction of mismatched operating models. This shift requires cultural as well as contractual adjustments, but the payoff is a seamless ecosystem where adaptation flows through the entire value chain, not just within isolated teams. Risk management integration ensures that adaptation accounts for shifting exposures. As priorities evolve, so too do risks, and leaving registers static creates dangerous blind spots. Adaptive teams update risk logs alongside backlog changes, ensuring that mitigations remain relevant. For example, adding a new feature may introduce privacy concerns, while dropping a planned control may weaken security posture. By integrating risk review into planning cadence, teams ensure that exposure is continuously reassessed. This practice reinforces resilience, preventing surprises that stem from outdated assumptions about risk. Integration also demonstrates responsible stewardship to stakeholders, showing that adaptability is not recklessness but measured responsiveness. Over time, this approach builds confidence that change is managed holistically, balancing opportunity with protection. Risk management integration transforms adaptation from a narrow delivery concern into a full-spectrum discipline that safeguards value across the entire system. Release strategies provide the technical foundation for safe adaptation. Techniques such as feature toggles, staged rollouts, and canary deployments decouple deployment from full commitment. This allows teams to evolve in production without risking broad disruption. For example, a new feature can be toggled on for a small subset of users, observed for issues, and rolled out gradually as confidence grows. If problems arise, toggles or canaries allow rapid rollback without halting the entire system. These strategies create safety nets that encourage experimentation and reduce the fear of deploying changes. By making adaptation technically reversible, organizations gain confidence to act quickly. Release strategies also provide richer data about real-world performance, feeding back into the adaptive cycle. In short, safe release practices transform adaptability from a risky gamble into a disciplined, evidence-driven process that combines speed with reliability. Cross-team synchronization ensures that adaptation does not create local optimizations at the expense of global outcomes. In complex systems, one team's change can ripple unpredictably into others. Synchronization mechanisms, such as shared cadences, dependency boards, and system demos, keep alignment visible. For example, when multiple teams release features simultaneously, a system demo allows everyone to see integration in action, surfacing issues early. Dependency boards highlight sequencing needs, so no team assumes autonomy where interdependence exists. These practices prevent conflicting adaptations, such as one team reordering work in a way that undermines another's priorities. Synchronization does not mean uniformity. It allows teams to remain flexible while ensuring that the larger system evolves cohesively. By investing in coordination, organizations preserve the benefits of adaptability without falling into fragmentation, ensuring that the whole product or service improves together. Anti-pattern checks protect against misusing adaptation as an excuse for poor discipline. Churn without learning, scope creep disguised as evolution, and late, unvetted changes that erode quality are common pitfalls. Adaptive teams deliberately look for these patterns and intervene early. For example, if priorities shift frequently but without new evidence, that signals churn rather than adaptation. Similarly, if additional features are added without revisiting outcomes, scope creep may be masquerading as responsiveness. By naming and monitoring these anti-patterns, organizations reinforce that adaptation must be purposeful and evidence-based. Anti-pattern checks act as guardrails, reminding teams that not all change is good. This discipline preserves credibility, ensuring that stakeholders continue to trust the process. It also keeps adaptability sharp, focused on learning and value rather than becoming a convenient label for indecision or poor planning. Success measures for adaptability confirm whether process changes are truly improving outcomes. Metrics such as time to pivot, outcome improvement after changes, and reduction in rework provide tangible evidence of effectiveness. For instance, if the time required to adjust to a regulatory update decreases over successive cycles, the process is becoming more agile. If post-change outcomes show measurable gains, such as higher customer satisfaction or lower defect rates, adaptation is delivering value. Reduction in rework indicates that teams are making better decisions earlier, guided by learning rather than guesswork. By tracking these indicators, organizations can distinguish between genuine adaptability and superficial activity. Success measures also create a feedback loop, showing where processes themselves need refinement. This closes the adaptive cycle, ensuring that not only products but also the methods used to build them evolve toward greater efficiency and reliability over time. Adaptive process synthesis highlights the discipline of evolving requirements without sliding into chaos. By anchoring outcomes, delivering in small slices, and basing resequencing on evidence, teams transform change from a threat into a driver of progress. Practices such as rolling wave planning, backlog refinement, and lightweight governance give structure to responsiveness, ensuring that adaptation is both fast and accountable. Technical enablers like release strategies and living documentation reinforce safety and transparency, while stakeholder co-prioritization and clear communication maintain trust. Together, these habits create a system where plans evolve continuously, not reactively, and where each adjustment brings the team closer to desired outcomes. The lesson is clear. Adaptability is not about abandoning discipline, but about applying it to learning, prioritization, and integration. With the right structures in place, evolving requirements become opportunities for better results, not signs of instability. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.